Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so like I said before, welcome to this joint Write the Docs Australia and Indian remote event around lightning talks. For those of you who haven't been to a Write the Docs event before, we are a series of conferences and local meetups focused on all things related to software documentation. So what the idea basically is, you don't have to be a technical writer to be a part of this community. You could be anyone in an organization who takes an active interest in the art of documentation. You could be a developer, you could be a UX person, you could be a software tester. As part of your role, you might be documenting something. So the whole idea around this community is role or job titles don't really matter. It's we call ourselves documentarians. So anyone who's got that interest and is passionate about documentation is a part of this community. Just a couple of things on the code of conduct. It's a bit hard to sort of monitor this, but we'll try and obviously everyone hopefully helps in. But just be friendly and welcoming in your interactions today. Be respectful and be careful in the words that you choose. So there might be people here who might take a little bit of offense at something, so just be careful in the words that you choose as part of your interaction today with this event. If you believe someone's violating the code of conduct during one of our events, please contact a member. So just a little bit of info on what's been happening with Write the Docs Australia over the last 4 years. We're coming up on 4 years in June this year. Down under, we've got over 750 meetup members. I would love to see everyone come up to a conference or an event in their city, but look, I mean, people jump in when they see a talk or a conference or a presentation that catches their eyes, and they try and contribute, and people are more than happy to volunteer to speak at these events as well. So we've got about 750 members. We've had 43 events over the last 4 years, which is probably a good thing. We've had like events across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, most of the cities, and also 6 remote events. So we've had webinars. We've had speakers from US and Singapore present to our members over the last couple of years. And we've had, like I said before, 3 annual conferences, couple in Melbourne and one in Sydney. So that's been a lot of fun as well. I'm just going to flick over to Raji. Raji, do you want to talk more about the Indian community? What's been happening in India and how are you going? Raji, is still there?
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
Yep.
Hi. Thanks for the opportunity, Swapna. This has been a great opportunity for the Write the Docs India community to be interacting with the Write the Docs Australian community. The Write the Docs Indian community is just about a year old, and we already have more than 550 members. We come from varied backgrounds, and all of us are someone who's really passionate about documentation and everything that is written or seen on the UI. We've had events that cover all of these aspects, accessibility, inclusiveness, how to make intuitive UIs. We have had great speakers, great sponsors who have hosted our events, and it's been a great learning experience so far. If anyone wants to talk about their documentation experience, their UI experience, or their user experience, please follow us on Twitter and just ping us. We'll be more than happy to have you as a speakers. That's about it, Swapna. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Raji. How do you get involved with Write the Docs community? There's the mailing list at writethedocs.org. There's meetups happening all over the world. I think most of the meetups last few months have been mostly remote for obvious reasons. But other than the current situation, we have meetups across at least 30 cities all over the world. So if you're in one of those cities and fancy catching up with the community, that's the way you can find out about local communities. There's also a very active Slack channel. Where you've got about close to, I think it's coming up to 10,000 members on Slack at the moment. There's a lot of different channels within the Slack community where you can talk about specific tools or specific terminology or technology and just your interest around documentation. And these are the meetup pages for the Write the Docs Australia and India from, I'm assuming that's where you've probably come in from. There's also the Write the Docs podcast, which is going pretty strong. Actually, I think I might have seen Chris Ward on this call. So, Chris, if you wanted to quickly maybe jump in, if you don't mind. I know it's a bit on the spot, but just talk about the Write the Docs podcast. Chris, I think you're on mute. Let me just unmute you for a second. Yep, still can't hear you. Sorry. All right. Sorry. Did I also see Jared on this call? I think if Jared's on the call, you might be able to jump in. Look, I'm probably just making this up as I go, but if it's probably one of those WebEx settings where people can't be unmuted if I've already muted everyone in there. But so look, I'll talk about the podcast quickly. We've got a lot of podcasts. The podcast has been going for the last couple of years, at least from what I know of that podcast. It's hosted by Chris Ward, Tom Johnson, and Jared Morgan, and they've done a fantastic job. So if you wanna, I'll put the link into the event pages so you can have a look at the podcast. And if you fancy maybe chatting about something that you have an interest in around documentation, get in touch with one of these guys for recording a podcast. So I'll just keep going. And then we come into our lightning talks. I think how are we going for time? I think we're doing pretty okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. I'm just going to flick over to Stuart Burnfield, who is in one of the most isolated cities in the world. At the moment, everyone is probably isolated. But Stuart Burnfield is from Perth, Western Australia. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll let Stuart take over the presentation.
Thanks, Swapnil. So do I use the share content button to take over the screen?
Yes, please. Yep.
Okay, can you see my first slide? No, it's just me.
Yeah, we can see your notes, but unless you've got it in that format.
Yeah, they're my notes. I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
Yeah, my talk is about legacy docs and how to have a long-term relationship with them. Okay, well, falling in love. It's intense, it's exhilarating, it's a little frightening. We know about this from Hollywood movies. Writing the docs for a first software release is pretty much the same. It starts with a first meeting. There are misunderstandings, setbacks, but everything ends happily ever after. The difference is that in Hollywood, the story usually ends right there. It's all done in just under 2 hours. Software docs last longer. They can live on for a very long time. and they can go stale in particular ways that you need to know about. You might have to take over a set of legacy docs tomorrow. So what will make your life easier? Other writers might have to take over your docs years or decades from now. Will they thank you? What will make their life easier? How can you guarantee a successful long-term relationship with your docs? Well, first, what do I know about legacy docs? Right now, I maintain the docs for two 20-year-old mainframe products. They add up to about 4,500 topics. If you printed it out, it would be about the same number of pages. Also, for a few years in the early 2000s, I looked after the docs for a component called ISPF, which comes with the IBM mainframe operating system, IBM Z. Developers use it. It's sort of like an integrated development environment. It's possible that it was the first ever integrated development environment. The first version was released in 1974, and it's still going, amazingly. Okay, so what's life like for legacy documentation? Over the years, it's very common to have company changes as companies are bought out or merge. There can be organisational changes. If you work for a government department, it's very common for them to split up and be put together with other departments. That may cause changes in style and tools and so on. The tools that you use may just become unsupported, or better tools come along. So you have to convert your legacy docs to work with new tools. This has happened to me. Sometimes you have the viewable version of graphics to go in your manuals, but you don't have the original source files anymore, so you have to recreate them, which is a pain. Links, as everyone knows, it's very common for them to go stale and become broken if you're not careful. Another thing that changes is the publication format. In the example of the ISPF product I mentioned, it began life in the paper era. It was a paper manual in 3-ring binders. After a decade or two, IBM came up with a kind of proprietary online viewer, which was a new thing at the time. The same manuals have been published to PDF as Eclipse help, and now, of course, HTML help. So it's the same documentation, but the way it was written originally was with paper in mind. Another thing that changes is the technical writers who work on it. And the people come before you, people will come after you. The software itself may change. Over the years, new versions come out. The software may be split off into different products. It may merge with other products. It may run on different platforms, and the emphasis of the product may change as some features fall out of use and new ones are added. It's pretty common for legacy docs for inappropriate material. I don't mean rude material. I mean stuff that doesn't really belong in a user manual, but it's just added because time is short, and often it's documentation that's useful for development, but it's not really user doc. And while it might seem like a good short-term decision to add this stuff to the user docs, once information's in there, it's pretty hard to get rid of it. So it's common to find legacy docs puffed out with information that really doesn't help users. There can be information that's summarized from external docs, and this is not a bad thing. Sometimes you want to help the reader by saving them from looking up documentation elsewhere. But just remember that the original material may get updated and your summary of it may get older and older. Finally, I think I need to rush a bit. Software products tend to accumulate too many interfaces. I don't know if you've found this, but we started with an old mainframe terminal interface, and then we ended up with a new batch interface and a GUI client and a web browser interface and a Eclipse client, and just recently REST APIs. All these things made sense to our friends in marketing at the time, but it means lots of copies of the information which need to be maintained every time we add a new feature. Okay, so that's what life is like. I'm one slide behind for a legacy doc. Okay, I've got some tips to help you with your legacy docs. First slide is to do with things that you're probably doing anyway. They're just good tech writing. Call it the 4 Cs. You want your material to be clear, concise, consistent, and current. To make it clear, I think it's good to write with a reader in mind for whom English is a second language. It may not be the case, but it's good for everyone. If you write short, unambiguous sentences, if you keep your vocabulary simple and consistent, that makes it easier for people for whom English is not their first language. It's easier for translators, and it's easier for people who are English as first language people. Consistency. Try to keep information that changes in common files and use variables. If all this sort of changeable information is in one place, it's easy to see it. Every time you come to a new release, you might be reminded to check something to make sure it hasn't gone out of date. That's things like product names, version numbers, URLs, citations of other publications. Okay, the third C, keep it concise. Avoid copying information around. If you have very obscure, specific information that maybe only interests a very, very small number of users, perhaps consider putting it outside the user docs in an FAQ, have a blog for material like that, have a library of white papers, so that very, very specific information isn't cluttering the user docs. Also, be careful with notes. Sometimes if a customer has a problem, the temptation is to add it to the manual, find a topic in the vicinity and say, note, don't forget this. But over the years, they can really, really build up. And what they're doing is drawing away the attention from the main line of your text, the main information in your topic. And all of these notes are saying, well, look over here, this is important. One way to deal with them is either just try and rewrite them so that they're just part of the main information, they're not a standalone note. Another thing you can do is try and have a specific label. If you're warning them about something, there are standards, international standards for what you should label as a caution or a warning. If it's a tip, just a time saver, it's not something they have to know, but it might be handy, call it a tip. If it's to do with a restriction or a limitation, you can say this is a restriction. And that way you can help the reader to know whether it's something they need to check on or they can bypass it. The final C is keep your information current. So don't have specific references if you can avoid it to particular product version numbers. I'm talking about external products like versions of Java or that sort of thing. Maybe you could isolate these sort of references in a bibliography and avoid words like now and new. I've deleted material that said, now you can do this, in the past you had to do that. And on digging into it, it was from about 10 years ago. So that information was new in 2010, but it's certainly not new now. Okay. And just a couple of specific tips to do with legacy docs. We don't often get a chance to choose our source format, but if you do, try and go for an open, well-supported format. Word isn't all that open, but there's lots of tools to import and export material and work with content in Word. I work with XML, and it's an open format, so you're not really locked in. Because often when working with a very big, very old doc set, you sometimes want to go searching through thousands of topics to make changes, and you really want tools to help you do that. You can't do it once at a time. When you're migrating to a new tool or a format, beware of just doing a quick conversion because you're busy and all you can do is just get it working in the new tool or the new format. Sorry, I just had a little ticky noise. I think it's coming from, sorry. Yes, if you do a minimal conversion, all you're trying to do is get the thing working, get it published so that the new version looks roughly like the old version did, but using the new tool. The danger is that you're losing whatever advantages the old format had, and you're not really taking advantages of the new tool, which presumably you moved to for some good reason. So if you think that you can come back to it later and maybe add in all those good things later, in my experience, that's very hard to do. If you can build in time during the migration, do it then. And any time that you save using automated tools, it's great to have a tool that converts your docs for you. but spend that time you save on checking, because there could be some obscure problems in particular functions. I think I should leave it there because I think I'm out of time. In conclusion, I think if you treat your docs with love and respect, you're in for a long, happy relationship. Thank you. If you have any questions, please chat me or ask now.
Thanks, Stuart. What I might do is I might just get people, if they've got questions, to put it in the chat window, and then maybe we can come to the questions at the end of everyone's talks, if that's fine.
Sure.
All right. Thank you. All right. If you want to stop sharing, we can go on to our next presenter for the night, who is Ravi. Ravi, do you want to share your screen? And
hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, it's coming up now. Yep. Perfect.
Okay, folks, I know artificial intelligence is a buzzing word, and there will be a feeling that as tech writers, our role might be limited, but I just want to set some context and understand how tech writers can actually make a big gain out of this AI revolution. Just a simple point to mention before I start. AI, I mean, a lot of people think that AI is just a hype. AI is not really going to impact TechCom, but I would say if we look at the core of artificial intelligence, we can see information architecture is playing a vital role there. So at the very outset, I would like to say that without IA, that is information architecture, there's no AI. So with that context, let me just get started. So we are already part of AI revolution. We know every single app that we use, which is as basic as Uber to as complex as Google or even Google Photos. Under the hood are actually managed by complex AI algorithms. Since we will not be dealing much of the introductory nature of artificial intelligence, what it is and how it is helping. In the interest of time, I'll just try to draw your attention to a couple of examples here. The way the drivers are mapped to the rider to the rides that we book is a complex algorithm which is driven by AI, and all those you may buy this suggestions on Amazon are again driven by AI. And of course, we have more complex things like fraud detection, facial recognition, and also the future self-driving cars. Just 1 second. So yes, the whole world is driven by AI. That's understandable. But how is it a big deal for TechCom? How is it going to help us in our day-to-day writing work? Will it really help us? Will it really make us better writers? Will it really help us understand the customer preferences? Will it really help us engage better with the customer? These are certain questions we should ask ourselves, and I'm sure the answers would be pretty evident in the following slides. So just going back to where we started, AI needs IA. In short, if we see how we organize our content, we have a great content strategy in place, which would organize our content into various information elements. And these information elements are complemented with the metadata. And one very important aspect which can actually help us uh, go straight into the AI era in terms of using the content is to get the context of the user. I'll give you a simple example. Uh, Today, I am in Hyderabad in a place called Manikonda. If I if I want to book a cab, the cab operator should know my location, should know my preference of the ride. Is it a sedan or is it a mini? Just relate these customer preferences as context in terms of content experience. Okay, let's get to see how writers can benefit from these AI tools. How many of you use acrolinks? I'm sure most of us. If then another interesting tool is Grammarly. These are certain tools which can really help us improve the way we write. Not just for English, as second language users, even for native speakers, these tools do really help in drafting a better version of language. Okay, let's look at the content life cycle. Sorry. So we work on content creation, which is governed by the organizational standards and guidelines. And we also work on how this content is consumed by customers. We try to get some metrics as to how customers are consuming our content. That's nothing but analytics. And we also right now, I agree we are following the traditional PDF, HTML methods. Uh, Going forward, I'm sure our methods of delivery will be more dynamic, more, uh, I would say, personalized for our customers. And the last one is the content optimization. So if this is what we consider as content lifecycle, uh, this is how AI is going to help us. I'll just take one or two examples here for each one. Let's take guidelines and standards. Each of us has our own unique way of writing, but as tech writers, we do follow certain standards and guidelines that our companies would want us, which is again aligned with the customers that we are serving our content for. So let's assume if there is no standard or automated way to govern these guidelines, if everyone writes content on be it any tool, it can be FrameMaker, it can be Arbortext, Oxygen, or even Word for that matter. So without having an automated uh, tool which can help us align our writing style with the organizational standards, I'm sure there will be a lot of errors, not just in terms of basic grammar, in terms of matching uh, or rather delivering the right content that would help the customer. So we know customers come to our content only when they are stuck. Of course, that's one use case. Second use case is someone is a thorough user of a document. He doesn't want to take any chance with the product implementation, so he might uh, read the document thoroughly and then probably get started with the whole implementation. So when we have certain guidelines and standards, we will be in a better position to serve our customers. Let's take the second example, DocOps. I'm sure publishing is such a time-consuming and painful process for most of the doc engineering teams. Imagine we have some batch operations which get optimized time and again with the help of AI. As uh, my as a speaker mentioned before, there are issues with the legacy content. If we can have certain content rules which would help us identify the broken links, for example, in an automated manner, we will not need to spend a lot of time finding to understand where the links are broken, where the referencing has issues. So all such things can be automated with the help of AI. A third thing, one more example I would like to quote here is the content intelligence. So we all know when the customers do not find content, they tend to go to support, and they also tend to create support tickets. So if we can analyze the support tickets and map it with the content they have used before raising that ticket, with the content intelligence effort, we will be helping our organization save a lot of time and money that goes on resolving each ticket. So these are certain use cases. I mean, actually, this is a 1 hour long session, but in the interest of time, I thought I would just relate to these sample use cases where AI can really make a huge difference. I'm sure you might ask me, is it not something that we are already doing? Yes, we are doing these things, but every single effort will consume a whole lot of time. With the help of AI algorithms, we will be in a better position to identify, resolve these issues in no time. So that way, it is going to make all of us better writers. So just a summary statement here. We will be better writers. We will be following the processes more efficiently, and we will also be understanding our customer in a better manner, and our content delivery methods also will become more dynamic. We will understand the customer behavior, customer needs, and then we will be personalizing the content to suit their needs. So AI is, in short, benefiting writers. It's not replacing. So on a closing note, our lives are AI driven. So should our content be. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ravi. Yep, you can put in any links that you have, maybe to your videos or anything. I know you've given this presentation before, so if you wanted to maybe post that link in the chat, that'll be great. Cool. We're gonna jump over
Sure.
to Gaurav. If you want to stop sharing, Ravi, Gaurav, do you want to jump in, mate? Do you want to start with your presentation?
Right.
Hello, can everyone see? Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Oh, just 1 minute, sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining in today. This talk, Essential Git Fu for Technical Writers. It is my take on making Git a bit easier for us writers. And trust me, this is not a mini lightning tutorial about how to use Git. It's just a technique I use. So, I'm just trying to switch slides. Okay. So I'm a technical writer. I've been using docs as code approach and Git for quite a few years now. I've seen many writers struggle with Git commands. This presentation sort of includes little tips from me to make your Git experience simpler, easier, and probably more familiar. So what you can do is by using these techniques, you can map easy to remember English terms for the Git commands you use every day. For example, to create a new branch, you can run git new branch and add a branch name instead of running the usual command git checkout the branch name. So to me, that is more logical and saves me from remembering the actual command. So this is a very simple example, but of course you can use it for more than one command or more complex commands. And these are also helpful if you are explaining Git to someone new who has never used Git before. It will be easier for them to understand or to differentiate between checking out a branch or creating a new branch, for example. So let's talk about a complex case. In OpenShift documentation contribution guide, the first instruction is to ensure that your local repository is in sync with remote. And it lists the following 4 commands to run to sync the repository. And the contribution guide states that you must do these 4 steps every time you create a new branch for editing commit, for editing content, sorry. Now, this is a manual process and people are sloppy and sometimes, most of the times, they forget to do these steps, and which later on results in merge conflicts. And to minimize the chances of error and to better support your workflow, you can have the same new branch command handle all these 4 commands together. So you could create a new branch command that would run all these 4 steps for you. How one can do this? You can do it by using Git aliases. Git aliases allow you to create your own Git commands, and you can use them to specify, you can use an alias to specify a Git subcommand or bash functions that could run multiple commands. How do you create Git aliases? You can either use the git config command, which is git config, and then you specify the alias and the command it runs. And otherwise, you can also open your git config file, either your global git config file or your repository git config file, and specify the aliases there. This is the new branch aliases for running more than 1 commands, and it uses bash functions. So when you run the new branch command, it actually it runs the bash functions, which in turn runs all these commands. So the benefit of doing this is that you don't have to remember long commands or it's more easier and straightforward to use aliases. So some of the aliases I use are to get a remote branch. This is very helpful if you work with a team and review lots of pull requests from other team members. You can just run this simple command and get branches for your team members. Another handy one is work in progress alias. I use it if I'm in middle of something and I need to switch branches and look at other documents, or like stop what I'm doing and just start something new. I can use this alias to add my edited files and just make a work in progress commit. Other thing you can do is you can create more Git commands for deleting branches, renaming branches, or finding branches, all using Git command. Some more aliases. It's adding changes to a previous commit and undo commits. The best thing about aliases are you can share them with your team. So for sharing them, you can either include the path of the git config file. It can be a URL or network directory or your local folder path. Or a more simpler way, you can just copy and paste aliases from someone else in your git config file. So winding it all up, you should use git aliases for your everyday tasks. When you use them, they are easy to remember, and using git aliases allows you to run multiple commands, and you can accomplish tasks with multiple commands using a single command. And lastly, you can easily share your aliases with your team members. I gave a talk about this topic in LinuxConf Australia 2020, and these are the PR codes for the YouTube video of the talk and the blog post, and there's also a GitHub link for my aliases I've published in the GitHub repo. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gaurav. I've just picked up a couple of questions for your presentation. Do you have any alias for git merge and stash?
Yes, I do. So
Okay.
I'll share the links to my GitHub. It's a gist. So I do use one for stash, but I don't use anything for merge. But
Okay.
I do have for stash. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And I think the second question was probably tied to that. So are you happy to share your slides, maybe from this or one of the other conferences, and people can maybe then use that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I'll post the link in the chat, and I'll also send them to you if you put it on YouTube or something. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Gaurav. Excellent. I think we're doing pretty well on time. All right, next up we've got Prerana and Apurva. We're going to be talking about keeping your content alive. So over to you. Can't hear you, Apurva or Prerana, so if you wanted to unmute. All right, let me just do it for you. Okay, yep. All right, still no luck. Just give me a second. No. Or we might get back to you, Apurva and Prerana. I'm just going to sort this out for you. In the meantime, if I can see if we can get Ruchi. I think I could hear her earlier. So maybe Ruchi, if you wanted to go before Apurva and Prerana, we'll come back to you, Prerana and Apurva. That's okay. Thank you. Ruchi, if you don't mind sharing your screen and all right, it's coming up now. Looks like we've got some audio issues with Ruchi as well.
Swapnil, can you hear me? I'm just doing a quick check.
Yeah, you can hear, I can hear you now. This is Raji. Ruchi is still there? All right. No, I don't think we've got Ruchi either. Apurva, do you want to try again? Just sharing your screen. I'll see if I can unmute you, and you and Prerana can maybe have a go. Sorry about this, people. No, nothing. Please don't make me do my horrible rendition of hello. No, I don't think it is. All right, this might be a good opportunity. This is one of those things where someone might have to step in and do an impromptu lightning talk. I know we've had one of these before. I'm looking at you, Jared, but if anyone else wants to maybe jump in for a second. Has anyone else got anything they wanted to share? This is your moment to shine. Couple of minutes.
Hey, Swapnil, this is Lubana here.
Hi, Lubana.
Hi. I don't really have a talk per se, but I had presented a while ago in the Write the Docs India meetup about measuring effectiveness of documentation.
Okay.
So I was wondering if a few people had some thoughts around how they measure the effectiveness of their documentation. Just a bit of context. I was part of this team for an open source project, and our documentation was very, very ineffective. And the only way we were able to find out that was actually by doing some user research. We observed users just go through the documentation and then fail. And that's how it kind of showed us. So I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts about what's worked for them in terms of measuring how effective their documentation is.
Yeah, sure. We can take that as a question. People can probably
check whether I'm audible to everyone. This is Ruchi this side.
Yeah, okay. So we've got Ruchi and I think we've got Prerana as well, maybe? No, Prerana's still offline.
Hello. Yes, Ruchi, we can hear you. Thanks. Finally.
Thanks, Raji. Yeah, okay. I'll just go on mute. I think somebody's saying.
I was just going to reply to the last point. I think there was a talk at Right Docs 2019 in Sydney about this point. Someone was talking about measuring open source effectiveness. So maybe, and all those videos are online, so I can't remember the details, but I think someone did talk about it.
Oh, great. If you, sorry, was that Alec?
Yes, it was.
Okay, thank you so much. If you happen to have the link, could you send it on the chat? I'll look for it anyway, but cool. Thank you so much.
Am I audible now? This is Prerana here.
Yeah, Prerana.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Apurva, can you try it from your end if you can hear me? Okay, Apurva, we cannot hear you. Swapnil, if you can, Apurva says that if you can unmute her, she has mentioned in the chat.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working. Hang on. I think I might have. No, I think there's something wrong at my end. I'm sorry. Okay, are you able to present using the slides? Is that something you can do for now?
Yeah, sure, but I mean, Apurva won't be able to present her slides in that case, I wonder.
Okay, we'll keep trying. Maybe you can do. Maybe you can make a start, and we'll see how we go. Because we'll. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Apurva, if you can mention in the chat, are you able to hear us? I think you can. Okay. So, hello everyone. My name is Prerana, and I have my unmute partner Apurva for now. We are from Pune, and we are working with Red Hat since 2017. We are with a documentation team, and we contribute in Red Hat Enterprise Linux documentation. This is our first time with Write the Docs. We were quite excited, but now I'm pretty sure even Apurva will agree we are a bit nervous because of all the things that happen. So anyway, today we'll be talking about how to keep our content alive, and we will be covering how and why is it necessary to have up-to-date content, and how to keep our content up to date. So a minor change in the product can lead to major change in the user experience, and if this change is not addressed in our documentation, there can be various results a customer can go through. As you can see on this slide, a customer might get frustrated, and it will be difficult for them to use our product, and at the end they might discard it. So what are the ways that we can see to it that our content or our documentation is up to date? We have come up with three process, or I should say three methods that we ideally follow in Red Hat: content findability, peer review framework, and direct documentation feedback. So one of the way to keep your content up to date is to see that your content is findable. It's searchable by your search engines. Findability means finding information. Content is findable if you use right keywords, and this can be achieved by using, of course, various tools. So as Mark Baker said, findability is a content problem and not a search problem. I agree to this thought, because every time we cannot assume that if your product is not findable by a customer, or if your product is not findable by a search engine, that does not mean that the customer did not enter the correct query in the search engine. It can be the reason that you have not used the right keywords that is required to be there in the product documentation. So there are various tools like Google Trends, Adobe Analytics that can help you to resolve this issue and make your content or your document findable. We have created a short demo with Google Trends that shows how using an upcoming or a trending keyword can help you make your document up to date. So we have used your introduction as one of the keyword and overview as another keyword, and we have given the search result across worldwide for past 12 months. And you can see introduction, this is one of the trending keyword that customers use a lot. So probably usage of such keywords, or if you are confused at which keyword should be used, you can use Google Trend for this. Moving ahead, Apurva, can you still give it a try if we can hear you? I think so. We cannot. So, well, this was something which Apurva was supposed to present, but I'll fill in the gap. So, peer review framework. This is one of the another method that we use here. Improve reader experience, content health check, and user-like content testing. So, in improve reader experience, we recommend that that writers should have clear titles, as we suggested in one of our demo. Introduction and overview is always a debatable title that we always go through as writers, that the title should be introduction or it should be an overview. So a clear title will help user or a reader to understand, and it will be easy for them to do a Google search. It should be action oriented, of course. It should be procedural to whatever you write, the steps that you mention. Instead of writing it in a concept format or in a theoretical format, if you make it a stepwise procedure, it will be very easy for readers to understand your content. No fluff. Definitely, we do not want to go on and on talk about the product, and instead do not mention what exactly the product does. Content health check is also recommended, wherein you need to verify your steps, whatever the procedures you have mentioned in your documentation. It is recommended that you also mention a verification step for customers, for the readers to understand that this is how the output will be, so that it will be easy for them to connect with your product or with your documentation. And definitely link direction. So if there are any hyperlinks within your document, it is good to keep a check on those link direction. I believe that there are many tools available in market that helps you to do that. In Red Hat, we use different kind of scripts to overcome this issue. And user-like testing, user-like content testing is something that needs to be done with your devs or with your QEs. In one of your sprint, if you follow an agile format, in one of your sprint, you can collaborate with your QEs and you can perform a content testing, and you can see how exactly the way it is written in the document. And if something is missing, QEs or devs are there to help you to update that content. Moving on to next slide. Direct documentation feedback. Now, this is something which we use in Red Hat. It's a Red Hat utility, and we get direct feedback from customers who use who go through our Red Hat documentation. In this process, the customer is expected, ideally or initially, the process is that the customer will go through your document and they will raise a ticket and they will contact support or some other things. But over here, we have come up with this utility wherein the customer can directly go to the documentation, and if they come across some command or some grammatical issues or typos or links, anything that they think is not correct, they do not have to contact a support or to someone else. They can directly give the feedback on the documentation itself. So this is a demo which will show you how it works. So right now we will be seeing one of the documentation, one of the release note documentation of Red Hat. This utility works only on multi-page view style and not on single-page view style though. So Now we select a content. You can either select the entire sentence or even you can select a word as well. Here you add your feedback, whatever the feedback be it command, be it even an apostrophe missing or any grammatical issues. You submit your feedback and a ticket gets generated immediately. Once this ticket gets resolved, the customer is informed that that the issue has been resolved. So this is how we take care of customer feedback as well. So yeah, these were the few ways that we wanted to share with everyone we follow in Red Hat. So hopefully it was helpful, and I'm sorry Apurva couldn't join us via audio, but yeah, it was great help from her. Thank you everyone.
Thanks, Prerana.
Thanks, Prerana. Sorry, Apurva.
All right. We've just got time for one more presentation. So Ruchi, if you're still in the call, do you want to start sharing your screen?
Sure, I'll just do that. I hope everybody is able to see my screen.
Yep.
All right, quickly. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Sapnil. In this time of pandemic, I thought this is the very apt topic to talk about dealing content accessibility with the elephant in the room. And we all know who the elephant in the room is COVID-19. More than 200 nations today are dealing with pandemic in fear. A lot of issues happening around, and how we content community like us can help and support during this time is pretty important. And well, while I was doing kind of a little bit of research on how the accessibility and inclusivity is working during this time of pandemic, I was amazed to see that there are a lot of things, a lot of issues, a lot of problems around the content which is accessible on the net, which is not accessible or inclusive for everyone. So to start with, I just want to talk about that we have we have 15% of the entire world population, which is into this spectrum of disability. And this 1 billion population, and probably 15 to 20% of the world population today in this pandemic is in the high risk of COVID-19. So when we get to know this kind of situation, how we as a content community can help them, the way we write the content is what I'm going to talk about. Not in depth, because this is kind of a very, very deep topic. It requires a lot of time to, discuss each and every aspect of it. But I'm going to just touch base on this, my research, which I've done in a little bit of time. So I'm going to talk about that. So here is the thing. So the status quo is the people with disability are unable to understand what is happening around the world, because the information which is available on the print media, on the social media, and on the digital platform is not accessible and not in the format for them to understand. We have lack of sign languages, audio format or braille, and necessary communication equipment are not being addressed the way it has to. We have inaccessible digital communication, be it retail websites or essential service website, or in fact government website also. And lack of inclusive education for children with disabilities. So while I was doing that, I looked into a few of the examples which was on available on the websites, which clearly defines that is a bigger problem there. So there are some kids which are, the schooling is closed, and the only mode for them to learn is e-learning way, and the platform which they use for in their particular area, like Lebanon is a small place where the schools, private schools, they don't have inclusive education for the people with the disability or people with blind or low vision, spectrums. Similarly, the people in Canada, some of the people who are self-quarantined, they are having hard time to get the information from the public healthcare websites. So when I researched a few of the leading newspaper and essential websites like Amazon and New York Times with a web checker, I figured out that there are a lot of issues. If you see my screen, there are like 20 errors and 51 contrast error for New York Times and 40 alerts. And we have 97 alerts for Amazon, 3 errors and three contrast errors. When I dive deep into the details, I figured out that they were missing forms. The labels, the form doesn't have the labels. They were missing a long alternative text. The links are not descriptive. The buttons doesn't have any kind of text, and the contrast errors. So these are the kind of blunders it is, because in this pandemic, these are the people who really require the support, who really require the information, so that they can make the adjustment around this whole period. Because when we talk about isolation, when we talk about social distancing, we need to understand they require a caretaker, they require somebody to help them and support them. And if we have that kind of ecosystem right now during this pandemic, we need to have at least the information free flowing for them, so they know how to take care of themselves, what are the rules and regulations coming around, how to go to the medical healthcare provider, what kind of support they require in their surroundings. So all this information which is accessible to the people like us, but not like people who are in the spectrums, it's really heartening to see that. But I think when we write our content, we have to be more inclusive in the way we write. There are a lot of guidelines available across web for W3C, but people are not following that. We need to make sure that when we write content, we do our bit to make sure the content is accessible and inclusive in the sense for the wider audience. So that's about the web accessibility snapshot I have. And in this whole research, I did interviewed a couple of medical providers, physicians, OBGYN in India. And when I spoke to them about like what kind of care they are taking and what kind of information they're providing them, if a person comes with who is identified as COVID positive, uh, are they providing the handout which have all captions or braille, or some translator? Does they have translator in their medical facility to translate, or interpreter? I was amazed to see they don't have that. For them, the primary goal is to address the people who are coming, irrespective of who it is and what kind of, and if a person required this kind of support, they only rely on family and friends to support them with any kind of information passing to them. If a person doesn't know sign language, he doesn't have a friend or family, uh, he won't be able to get the information. So it is like that. It's heartening. It's very very when I'm talking about this topic, it's pretty giving me kind of a goosebumps right now, because that's the truth. That's the truth. And we as a content advocate and provider, we have to make sure that when we are writing our content, we have to include captions wherever this we have to use alternative text. The text should have headings. It should be accessible in the format. We have to, when we are using tables, there are some guidelines with regard to the tables. And no flashy colors. The foreground and the background color should be in the range where the person with a low vision can access that. And use captions for the images or any kind of documents which are flowing on the digital platform or social platform. Also, when we look at the news channels, we don't have any kind of sign language provided for the people. So I think it's pretty critical here in this particular environment, in this particular time, that we have this information free flowing with all this accessibility and inclusivity in place. Yeah, so I only have these things to talk about. We do have guidelines. There was a kind of a brief session which I gave in last STC and TC World, which include the guidelines, which include like what kind of words we need to avoid, what are things which we need to take care of. Like if we are using button, rather than saying click here, be more descriptive to it, like what exactly that button is doing. So we can say watch now to to see this video, rather than saying just click here. And if you are giving a label to a button, rather than saying tap to speak, you can say voice search, because that is more task oriented. It's talking about what task a user has to perform, and might not be possible he's using a touch screen. He might be using assistive technology, keyboard. So we have to be very conscious about when we write this kind of descriptions, when we're writing any kind of content, whether we're designing a UI or whether we are writing a simple help. So I think that's a bit which we can do for the society. And also when we write a content, it's not writing for one person. We write for one person, but we write for 7 billion people. So designing for 7 billion starts with designing for one. So I want to end that way. Thank you, and appreciate your time, and I hope everybody is safe and sound in this time of pandemic. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruchi. I think we're right on the time at the moment. So I don't think there's any specific questions that have come out. I think if everyone's happy to share their slides, we can put them up on the meetup pages. And I'll also, like I said, it's been recorded. We'll put this up on the Write the Docs YouTube, and I'll post those links and send out email messages as well. So thanks everyone for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you at a future meetup. Thank you.
Thank you